Psycho tells the story of a woman on the run with a loot full of stolen cash who comes into contact with a very friendly motel owner who's under the control of his overbearing, psychotic, and murderous mother. Welcome everybody to my Psycho review series. This is a franchise that I've been wanting to talk about for quite a while, and if you've been paying attention over there at Williscreedia, he dropped a trailer very similar to the Texas Chainsaw and Child's Play trailers that I dropped on this channel, and let you all know that this year for 31 on 31, we were also including the Psycho franchise. So I need to review these bitches so that I can get the ranking out, and then come Halloween, I already have all this content in place and can place them on that ranking. So we've got 4 Psycho films in the original franchise, and then the dreaded 98 remake, which I have not seen since 1998. So 5 films is going to be very interesting. I have seen all of these films before. None of these are fresh watches. I've seen Psycho 2 numerous times. I've seen the first Psycho numerous times. 3 and 4 will be my second watch whenever I get to review those. But getting way ahead of myself. We'll talk about those when we get to those. Now, the original classic 1960 Psycho, Alfred Hitchcock's what many would call masterpiece. This is a film that, I'll be honest, it took me a while to appreciate it for what it is. Not that I ever thought this was a bad film, but it's a 1960s film, and watching it as a kid, watching it as a young adult, it never really hit home like a lot of the 80s, 90s slasher movies and stuff did that I kind of grew up with. This was always one of those movies that I would say that I appreciated more than I actually enjoyed. And luckily, upon rewatch just a couple of days ago, that shifted a bit. Now this is a film that I can say I totally appreciate and I enjoy pretty much just as much as I appreciate it. So a lot of things that I'm going to be saying here have been said to death, but this is my review, so I am going to have a few different thoughts hopefully than everybody else. So starting right off with the positives for the 1960 Psycho, and the first thing you got to say is just the performance by Anthony Perkins. Norman Bates is a highly underrated horror icon and a highly underrated slasher icon. When you start talking about the famous, horror icons, you always talk about Freddy, Michael, and Jason first, or the Godfathers. Then you start debating about which ones are below that. You always get Chucky and Leatherface and, Pinhead and Ghostface thrown in there. Norman Bates, to me, deserves to be in that B squad, if not competing to be in the A squad. He is that compelling and interesting of a character. He actually is more interesting than most of the horror icons, if you really want to get honest about it. But he's more underrated because this is a guy who, the mother personality is like the killer side of him, but Anthony Perkins and his performance as Norman Bates is just, the Norman side is just a gentle, friendly, very likable person. So that kind of dichotomy of those two characters, it makes him unlike any other horror icon out there. He's not inherently evil. He's not out there to just lay waste to the world, and he enjoys every minute of it. He hardly even understands what the hell he's doing most of the time.
You're not really going to go out again and drive up to the diner, are you?
No.
Well, then would you do me a favor? Would you have dinner with me? I was just about to myself. Nothing special, just sandwiches and milk, but I'd like it very much if you'd come up to the house. I don't set a fancy table, but the kitchen's awful homey.
I'd like to.
The fact that the character in himself, just the bones of the character that was written for him to play, is that interesting. It gets taken to a new level with the performance of Anthony Perkins, who is totally against typecast with this killer, this evil person that is supposed to be revealed in the final act and you're supposed to hate at some point. He's a handsome guy, he's a friendly guy, he's very kind of almost neurotic how friendly he is, scampering off to get her a sandwich and milk whenever Marion Crane comes to the hotel, and talking about how much he loves his mother, and you get to see little shades of where the evil starts to come out. Like one of my favorite scenes in this as far as his performance is whenever she gives the suggestion that if your mother is so ill, why don't you put her into a home? And slowly in that conversation, in that scene, you start to see that kind of spread from friendly Anthony Perkins to evil Anthony Perkins, almost kind of transitioning into mother in a way.
Wouldn't it be better if you put her someplace?
You mean an institution? A madhouse? People always call a madhouse someplace, don't they? Put her in someplace.
Sorry, I didn't mean it to sound uncaring.
What do you know about caring?
And the way that he just nails both sides of the coin with this character, not only with this film, but in the films to come where he gets to play around with the evil side a lot more, it's a brilliant performance. I mean, it's one of those like stand-out, career-defining performances for a very iconic character that I think deserves to be mentioned amongst the names that we mention almost every single week in the horror community. From there, you gotta talk about the filmmaking by Alfred Hitchcock. Now, to be honest, this is a director that I know is like one of the most celebrated directors of all time. I'm not very familiar with his other works. This is pretty much it. I need to right that wrong, I understand that. But just looking at his work in this film alone, especially knowing the history of it, where he really dove into this material, where he was given, you know, the book. This is based off of a book that was based off of Ed Gein, pretty common knowledge in the horror community. But Alfred Hitchcock really fought to get this movie made when the studios didn't have a whole lot of interest in it. He had to keep negotiating and kind of keep making little deals to get them to back him in the production of this film, to the point where he had to shoot it with his own little Alfred Hitchcock Presents TV crew, which is amazing because there's some incredible shots in this film. He had to basically not take a paycheck for any of his work until the movie hit the box office, and then he made money hand over fist, and they probably wish they would have just paid him his director's salary. But aside from the cool history of that and how much he fought to make this classic film happen, that if he had not fought that much for it, it probably would have never even existed, which is kind of a scary thought, because then where would slashers have ever come from? But then you get his actual direction in this, the shots that he chose, the way that he kind of lingers on certain things, the camera angles that he uses. Like one of the more famous ones to me is like whenever he uses that ceiling bird's eye shot, whenever the detective is kind of coming up the stairs and then you see Mother come off to the side, whenever he frames the house. Like the hotel or the motel is creepy enough, but where you frame that house is kind of sinister and macabre in its own way that almost makes the motel an afterthought. Like it's all about the Bates house. The way that he really ratchets up tension in numerous scenes throughout this, even before you get to Bates Motel, when you're just focused on Marion Crane and her, you know, playing around with the idea of taking this money, and she's trying to flee town, and then her boss walks across the street, you know, Marcellus Wallace style, and looks at her and he's like, that's peculiar.
Don't tell me I've nothing to do. It's good to see you. I must go. I know I'm a good run. Anyway, my eyes are not.
All that, like you really put yourself into the shoes of Marion Crane and kind of the hyperventilation she's going through and the tension and the uneasiness about what am I doing? Am I going to get away with this? Every single person that looks at her, every cop that pulls over and kind of stares at her from across the street, everybody feels like they know who she is, they know what she's done, and it's all about to crash down on her like a house of cards. And it's all because of the way that Hitchcock directs these scenes. And for someone that grew up in, you know, the 80s and 90s films where all of the techniques are very in your face, when you go back and watch something like this that was in black and white and was, you know, a different era of filmmaking altogether, and they had to be very creative and basically invent things to get their story across without actually saying anything, to get the emotions across, to get the tension going without saying, hey, you should be tense right now. Like towards the end when you get the final reveal of Mother, when she kind of sitting in that backwards rocking chair and she kind of just turns around, you see that skeleton and then the light flowing around, which would not really show up as well if it wasn't black and white. You just kind of see the shades of white going across the dark background before Anthony Perkins comes in with a dress. Like small things like that that only exist in this era. Of course, you got to give kudos to the score. Psycho is one of the most famous horror scores of all time. That's almost like a pop culture joke anymore. Whenever you see like modern slashers, they make that sound. And circling back around to characters, we get Janet Leigh playing Marion Crane, who is the main character of this story, for the most part. And yes, Janet Leigh actually is Jamie Lee Curtis's mother. You should have known that if you're a horror fan, but if you didn't, hey, the more you know. But yeah, the main character of the story for the most part, I say for the most part because this is the movie that kind of, or one of the movies, if anything, that started the big thing about, you know, the few horror films that will have the guts to kill off a main character halfway through the film. As far as I know, Psycho was maybe the first one, if not the first major one that did that. I know somebody's going to correct me down below. Actually, it was this one in 1958. But you get Marion Crane. The movie starts off, it's all about her. It's about her kind of having this relationship with this guy who's named Sam Loomis. Just let that sit in there for a second. But Marion Crane is a very relatable character because she's just kind of a regular, everyday woman. She works at a bank. She's got this boyfriend that she wants to have a further relationship with, doesn't quite have the finances to make it work because he lives in California, she lives in Arizona, I believe. If I'm getting it wrong, someone's gonna let me know down below. But she gets this opportunity where a large sum of money is placed in front of her. It feels like she can get away with it if she really wants to, so she takes it. She grabs it by the balls, she seizes the opportunity, carpe diem, takes this money, and tries to run away to California to start this new life with her boyfriend. And it's all about the way that Hitchcock directs these tense scenes where she's starting to feel that paranoia, and that paranoia really comes through where every single person feels like they know what she's done, or they know that she's done something wrong, even though none of them have any idea. And it kind of plays all the way through where you relate to her peril, you relate to her overall goal, and then unfortunately you really have your gut torn out if you're really invested in her whenever she gets to this Bates Motel. Seems to be in this innocent situation where the rain just won't let her go any further, and she ends up in the hands of the titular psycho. And if you haven't seen the movie before, especially back in the 1960s, it was a huge shock to see the main billed actress, the main character, killed off very violently halfway through the film. Then you're going, where the fuck is this gonna go from here? Now let's talk about that shower scene. This is the most infamous, famous, celebrated, iconic scene in this entire film. There's an entire documentary made just about this shower scene. That's how important this scene is. And it's for good reason, because like I said, back in the 1960s, when you're watching this film for the first time, whenever this was first presented to audiences, nobody expected this to happen, where you get Janet Leigh, you get Marion Crane, she's had her little interaction with Norman Bates. It seems like there's gonna be some weird flirtation there. There's something weird going on with the mother, you're not quite sure. She goes in to take a shower, and immediately after having her first interaction with Norman Bates, this shadowy figure comes in, and even the way that the shot is framed, where Marion Crane is just kind of like off to the side of the frame, and just the way that it's kind of held there is so uncomfortable because of all this fucking empty space. You're like, fill something with that. And they do. Shadowy figure comes in, totally kept in the darkness, slides the shower, that infamous psycho score comes on, and Marion Crane gets stabbed to death in a way that was very violent and graphic for 1960. Nowadays it's pretty tame, but the way that it's shot and edited is just brilliant because it's not really a very bloody scene. There's a little bit of blood like in the water that, you know, that blood drips. They kind of use that as an effect to show that blood is actually coming out of her at some point, but just the way that the knife kind of movements are, the way that they kind of cut to her trying to shield it in any way that she can, it's just a brilliant scene. And it's something that back in 1960, and probably for a lot of people that would watch it, like younger kids and everything that would watch it nowadays, it hits you like a brick in the face because it comes out of absolutely nowhere, shifts the movie completely on its head, and just leaves you going, what now? You're like Marion Crane sitting there just bleeding out going, oh, okay, I just experienced that shit. And my final positive, which I would say spoiler alert, but I've already spoiled the fuck out of this movie. It's an old ass movie. Get over yourself if you haven't seen it. But the way that they shield the truth about Norman Bates, the way that they set up this character to make you really believe and sympathize with him like he's the victim. In a way he is. But you really think that there is a living woman in this house that is controlling, that is overbearing on him, that makes him do things he doesn't want to do, that eventually when you get to the halfway point in the shower scene, you're pretty much solid in your thought that she is murderous and psychotic, and you understand where the title comes from now, and you feel bad for Norman, who's stuck in this situation with a woman that he obviously liked getting gutted in the shower, and he has to clean up after it and get rid of the evidence and continue to put on this facade for the second half of the film when Marion Crane's sister and, you know, private investigators and everybody come to question him, and he has to try to shield Mother and shield everybody from what actually transpired here. You feel so sorry for this guy, only to have your gut punched whenever he walks in that final scene and you find out that it's been him the entire time. He is Mother, he is the titular psycho, he is the one that we have been afraid of this entire film.
Mrs. Bates.
And now for the negatives. Don't shoot me. I understand that this is a hailed masterpiece, this is a beloved film, totally respect that. There are some things, small to medium, about this movie that don't quite land for me, that I think could have been done slightly better. In hindsight is 2020, and some small elements, which is no fault of this film, it's just have not aged quite as well. This is a movie that was made in 1960, for Christ's sake, so there are some things watching it in 2019, they're gonna seem a little off. It's just totally different worlds, totally different eras. With all that out of the way, I do feel like the second half of this film, post-shower scene, is not quite as engaging as far as characters go as the first half was. I was always much more engaged with the storyline regarding Marion Crane than the storyline of her sister and lover trying to figure out what happened. I don't necessarily think that there's anything wrong with those characters. I don't think there's anything wrong with the performances. There's certainly a lot of great things happening in the second half where you're following mostly Norman Bates trying to hide everything and you're kind of more engaged with his character all the way to the eventual reveal. All that stuff is great. Just character-wise, I don't get nearly as invested with those two as I do Marion Crane. I also don't particularly love, although I understand the function of it, the long exposition dump scene immediately following the twist ending where Norman is revealed to be Mother, where you get this psychiatrist and he's telling everybody what's been going on inside of Norman Bates' head, how he's got a split personality and how this was the way he dealt with her murder and all that kind of stuff. I get that he had to put something in there to kind of dumb it down for modern audiences in 1960 to where they would understand fully what happened and people weren't walking away thinking that he was just pretending to be Mother or, you know, some weird interpretation that they could have for it. Hitchcock wanted to just lay it all out and make sure that they walked away understanding 100% what he was going for, and I get that. I don't necessarily even know a better way to go about that, but in 2019, when you watch that scene, it's like you have this huge high with this climax of the film, and then it's just like a 5-minute, which seems like 10-minute scene of this dude just talking and saying things that, as a modern audience member in 2019 watching it, I understand fully what happened without this scene.
Norman Bates no longer exists. He only half existed to begin with. And now, the other half has taken over.
And my final negative, which just has to do with the way some lines of dialogue has aged, which again is no fault of this film back when it was made. There are certain interactions, certain lines, certain words said that, more so in their delivery, come across a little bit corny to me trying to watch it now in 2019. The biggest one for me is immediately after the shower scene, whenever it shows the outside view of the house and Norman's like, oh, Mother! Blood! Blood! Like, the way that he says that, I can't watch it with a straight face.
Mother, oh God, Mother, blood, blood.
And again, I get it. In 1960, that was probably cool. That was probably Oscar-worthy acting back then. I get it. But nowadays, you know, movies evolve, our tastes evolve, our interpretations and the way we absorb certain things have evolved since 1960. And that is one element where I watch it as a modern audience member and I go, yeah. But all in all, guys, Psycho is an absolute masterpiece. I'm glad that I gave it a rewatch because before, where I said this was a movie that I respected for its craft, I respected for its legacy, I respected for what it did for the eventual slasher genre, and I did certainly enjoy it to a certain degree. I enjoy it much more now. I don't know if my tastes have just evolved or if just my appreciation has kind of taken a hold of my experience where I just start to see things that I didn't see before, but I really do enjoy this film on its own merits as well as its legacy. So Psycho is a masterpiece of the genre. It's a landmark film. I need to experience his filmography a little bit more, but it is one of Alfred Hitchcock's most celebrated films. So if you're a Hitchcock fan and you haven't seen this, very strange, but you should definitely check it out. And overall, it's a start to a very interesting and a very fascinating character and franchise that I'm looking forward to continuing on with. So if you want to check out one of the pioneer horror films that started what we know today as the slasher genre, look no further than Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. It's a great character study. It's a great history lesson on some landmark things that were done with directing, with camera work, and with storytelling. And it's a movie that will always be celebrated in the horror genre. So you and your mother, get a hold of a suitcase full of cash and go out and buy it. What do you guys think of Psycho? Are you a fan of this film? Has it aged poorly for you? Have you never really quite gotten what was so great about it? Are you a fan of it to where it's your favorite in this franchise? Have you seen any of the sequels? Do you prefer any of the sequels that you're excited for me to get into? Let me know all that down below. And do you think that Norman Bates deserves to be mentioned amongst the top horror slasher icons? Let me know down below. Let's talk some Psycho, people. So please, like and share this video, hit that subscribe button so you can stick around for all the Psycho goodness coming your way. Check the video description down below for social media links like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Also below that is my Teespring store, which has got all of my merchandise. There's t-shirts, bags, mugs, die-cast stickers, all kinds of crazy stuff. Great designs designed by the great Woody Bowen. There's Chucky designs. There's all kinds of goodness down there. So please click down below, check that merchandise out, and check out my Patreon page, which is also in the video description, which is a great way to give back to this channel, help this channel grow, and get cool exclusive content for your eyes only if you decide to become a patron. So check all that out, guys. And if you want to check out some more of my reviews, you can check those out by clicking right over here.